Welcome to Awake to Oneness Radio. I am Caroline Chang, your host. The mission of Awake to Oneness Radio is to inspire the world to awaken to the universal truth of oneness. Science is now teaching us that all life is interconnected and interdependent. And also, ancient wisdom and spirituality has been teaching the truth of oneness for eons. So basically, what you do to another person, you're literally doing to another aspect of yourself. And when mankind awakens to the universal truth of oneness, there will be peace on earth. Today's show topic is Soul Shift with author Mark Ireland. Mark is also the co-founder of a wonderful organization named Helping Parents Heal. Welcome, Mark, to Awake to Oneness Radio.
Thank you, Caroline. It's great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with your audience.
Well, thank you so much. What I'd like you to do is introduce yourself. You are an author. You are the co-founder of Helping Parents Heal, which I've just become an affiliate to Helping Parents Heal in the Poconos, PA. A lot of people know of the Poconos, but don't know what state we're in. we're in Pennsylvania, and currently I am the only affiliate for Helping Parents Heal in the state of Pennsylvania. So hopefully we'll get some more affiliates that are interested, especially in the Philadelphia area, which would be great.
Absolutely, big market.
Right, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So Philadelphia on the eastern side of PA, and we have Pittsburgh on the western side of PA. So maybe anyone in those areas listening to this show might check us out and join us. Okay, but Mark, please share with our listeners your journey.
Sure, thanks for that intro. And thank you for becoming an affiliate leader. We really appreciate the support and helping the parents around the country in all the different areas. So I'll tell you two quick intros here, or pieces of information about my story and my background, and then also tell you how Helping Parents Heal came to be. Okay. So my father, I had a rather unusual upbringing. I had a very gifted psychic medium father who counseled Mae West, who I got to meet when I was 19 years old, and a number of other celebrities, but he also founded a very progressive church back in 1960, where these abilities were featured as the gifts of the spirit. So it was kind of taking what a lot of traditional Christians read in the New Testament, but bringing it to life instead of like something that happened in the past.
Right.
Demonstrating for them, hey, there's more than just being a body and a brain. There is a realm beyond that, and demonstrating that through a variety of means, from not only psychic information, but relaying messages from deceased people that were very helpful to those on this side of the veil, if you will, yes, who are still in the physical form, that were grieving or hurting. So I grew up with that, and it just was part of our family. We couldn't get away with anything as kids. Dad knew everything that was going on. It really affected my older brother, who liked to hot rod or have people buy beer for him when he was underage, and he'd get busted and things like that.
Well, that's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was just highly specific too, and the amount, the realm of his abilities are beyond anything I've seen since. He passed back in 92, but growing up with that, it really shapes your sense of what reality is, to be a little different than the average person on the street.
Right.
And so despite that, I kind of took my own path, and my dad always said I was very psychic, and I've seen that pop through from time to time, but I didn't really focus on it. It wasn't really a central part of my life, for most of my growing years. And I guess part of that's, as you're a teenager and then a young adult, you kind of want to be your own person and forge your own path. And so I did. And I went to college, got a degree. I got married at a fairly young age, and we had a couple of boys. So I was just kind of cruising along the regular status quo American dream kind of thing, if you will.
Yes.
And in 2004, I had a wake-up call that pulled me out of that track and into one that I think is much more meaningful. Not that I've divorced myself from the business world, because I still have to pay the bills,
Right.
but to where the most important part of my life and the most passionate part for me is the spiritual side. And I look forward to in the future when I can pull out of the corporate world and just do that full time to be able to help people. So that event, that catalyst, if you will, was the passing of my youngest son, Brandon. And on that day, it was January 10th, 2004. He was about to go on a hike in the mountains behind our home, and I had a really uneasy feeling about it. And this might be one of those psychic episodes, if you will. And I was sitting at the computer and actually saw kind of a white light above me or something. I felt like it was a presence. It felt maybe angelic, or I don't know, or somebody on the other side. And I felt concern, extreme concern over this hike. But then I thought, the rational part of my mind, my left brain comes through, and I'm questioning myself, saying, you know what, you're just a worrying parent and all. But I did try and talk Brandon out of going, but he went anyhow. And his last words to me were, "We're going, Dad." In other words, stop worrying. He's 18 years old. He's going to do his own thing, and it's just, that's life.
Yeah.
So we left. We were my wife and I were on the other side of town for most of the day. And I had an uneasy feeling all day long, and my phone rang that afternoon, and I thought, okay, I'd left a note for Brandon on the table to ask him to call me when he got back. And I thought, okay, good, it's him, he's back. But it wasn't. It was coming from my other older son, Stephen, who was at work at the time. And he relayed to me that some of the buddies who had been climbing with Brandon reported that Brandon had fallen ill and something was wrong. He was passing out on the mountain, but they couldn't get good enough cell phone reception to get help. So I then called the authorities and asked them to send a helicopter, which they did because they were near the top of the McDowell Mountains in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Okay.
And so we started driving back across town. By the time we got there to the base of the mountain, there were literally hundreds of people and fire truck, ambulance, and helicopter. So it was a pretty scary scene. And it wasn't long after I told one of the policemen who I was that he introduced me to a chaplain. And then my heart kind of sank because I figured, why would they be introducing me to a chaplain unless it was bad news?
Right.
And sure enough, within about 15 minutes, I had just forced him and asked him the question if my son had passed, and he said, yes, he had.
Oh.
So that was the low point for me and my wife. And I started thinking in my mind right then, like, will we make it? Will I make it? Will I have a reason to live? But the one thing that sustained me really was drawing back on my childhood and what I'd seen with my father growing up, and knowing that there is more. And it's just about, bearing this hard part right now and getting through this.
Yes.
And one of the first things that happened shortly after this was, now my father was gone by this point, but I had an uncle who was still around who had very similar abilities. And I talked to him, and he asked if he could do anything to help me. And I just said, if you get any information or feel anything about Brandon and his well-being, I'd really appreciate it. And then it was a couple days later, I was in the mortuary, and my uncle and I spoke. Either I called him or he called me. I can't remember which. Mm-hmm. I was on a cell phone, and he said, Mark, I had something I wanted to share with you. And that is that, last night I tried to connect and I just couldn't get anything. But I got up this morning and did my morning meditation, and your father came to me, and he looked just like he always has. And he relayed to me that he was there when Brandon passed, and he helped him adjust. And Brandon wanted you to know you're the best parents he ever could have had, which is great and what we want to hear. But he also gave me a piece of information that was very validating, because at the time we didn't know the cause of death. And my uncle relayed that my dad had said Brandon's death was caused by a lack of oxygen in his bloodstream that ultimately caused his heart to fail. 2 or 3 days after that, I talked to the physician that performed the autopsy, and she explained to me that it had been a severe asthma attack, which had decreased Brandon's blood oxygen levels to a point of cardiac arrest. So the information provided by my uncle was exactly right. And so that was the validating piece that went along with the feel-good piece.
Right.
And that spurred me to start thinking about what I wanted to do going forward and how I could first help myself heal and help my family heal. And then it expanded into much more than I could have imagined. Early on, I I think a couple days after, I wanted kind of a personal connection or validation. And I knew it was possible. So even though I'm not a great meditator, I went into a darkened room, which I think was actually my closet. So it would be pitch black. And then I just quieted my mind as best I could and just prayed for some sort of sign or connection. And within a reasonably short period of time, image of my son Brandon's face kind of flashed across my mind's eye, followed by a cross with an oval loop at the top. And I'd seen those, but I didn't really know what they were. So it was something I had to kind of look into to see, well, is this a message of some sort? Am I supposed to decipher what this means?
Right.
And then I Googled what the cross with the oval loop is, and it's the Egyptian Ankh, which is the oldest cross of human history. And the lower part symbolizes physical life, and the loop symbolizes eternal life. So to me, that was relaying, the image of my son was smiling and happy. And then I get this message that it's eternal life. And it's something I didn't already know. So that was pretty meaningful. And then I think it was February. So Brandon passed in January. February, I'm watching the news in Phoenix on the NBC affiliate, and I see a little feature about a mediumship study being conducted at the University of Arizona at the time. Mm-hmm. And the medium they featured was Allison Dubois, who became famous later on for the show Medium. Which was originally on NBC. So they had the real life Allison Dubois doing a blind reading for someone where she couldn't see them or get any feedback. And then afterward, the sitters or the people who received the information provided feedback about the accuracy of that. And it was pretty impressive. So I thought, wow, this is getting back to like what I remember from my dad and along those lines. And I thought to myself, I'd love to get into that lab and be participant as a sitter, and I'd love to get a reading from Allison.
Yes.
Well, synchronicity kicked in, and the very next day I get a call from a gentleman in Dallas, Texas named Jerry Conser, who had been friends with my father. And Jerry said to me, "Hey, Mark, I know someone who might be able to help you. Her name is Allison Dubois, and here's a number you can call to try and get a reading from her." Wow. So pretty quick there. So I did eventually get the reading. She had a long wait list because she's very good and was, had a lot of people who used her services. And and I eventually got into that lab too and actually participated as a sitter, but with another medium later on named Lori Campbell. And that was actually taped for a Discovery Channel feature. People can see a clip of that on my website. There's a link to that. Wow. So through the course of this, I had a number of things occur, including 4 sessions with different mediums where I went in without them knowing anything about me and kind of being guarded, which I didn't really want to do, but I felt like it was important for my own sake of validation. Right. And at some point I felt like I was going to create a book out of this because it was kind of a journey I was on, and I thought it could be healing to others. Yes. But aside from the mediumship readings, which provided a lot of great validations that I'll share in a little bit, there was several episodes, but one in particular that was outside of that was very validating. So 6 months after Brandon's passing, we went on a cruise. My wife, Susie, and I, our son, Stephen, and we took Brandon's best friend, Stu, because Brandon was originally going to go, and it was going to be to celebrate his graduation from high school. So Stu, being his best friend, and the kid who was on the mountain with him, trying to resuscitate him for 45 minutes, was almost like our third son at this point. Yes. So we went on this cruise. We had a week-long cruise, and it was great. It was Western Caribbean. Mm-hmm. Well, the day we got home, my wife, Susie, she went to our bedroom and sat at the foot of our bed. And while she was there, she felt a presence, and she knew it was Brandon, and she actually saw out of her peripheral vision a shadow figure or a form. Yes. So she was pretty comforted by this. Right. But what was even more validating about it was the next day we got a call from another person. Now, this person's name was James Linton, and he had been in another hiking group the day Brandon had died. And his group, he had gone up to where Brandon was and tried to help, but was unable to. But we later connected with him, found out he was a musician who was a vocalist, songwriter, and guitar player. And before we left for the cruise, he learned that Brandon was a bass player, and he asked if he could borrow Brandon's bass guitar because he needed it for the song he was composing. So here it is one day after Susie's event, or, a phenomena where she felt and saw Brandon. And then James calls her and says, Susie, I have something to share with you. I don't know exactly how to share it. She thought maybe he'd broken the bass or something, but he indicated that while he was in the studio recording, he felt another presence in there with him. He saw a shadow figure out of his peripheral vision. He'd seen flashes of white light. And he kept denying this initially and thought he needed to take a shower or get water or something to eat. He was hallucinating. Each time he came back, it was stronger and stronger. And finally, he just felt compelled to say, hey, Brandon, what do you want? And then at that point, when he opened up to it, he was guided to redo the lyrics to the song and redo the song. And it's actually it's an excellent song. In fact, it's called The Other Side, or On the Other Side. And he said, it's the best song I've ever written, but I didn't write it.
Brandon.
So, yeah. So having
God.
that confirmation of the same event the day after from somebody else who knew nothing about Susie's experience was extremely validating. So I'll pause for a minute if you want to ask anything before I move on.
My heart is so full because I don't know if my son is also on the other side, Kyle. And I've had 2 readings. My first reading was with Suzanne Giesman, and I just knew instantly that she was connecting with Kyle because she was able to describe him to a T, and it was just and I'd never heard of EVP before, but we were on Zoom like we are now, and I was recording it in Zoom. And she was recording it using her microphone, which is really a very high-powered microphone. And Kyle was actually literally, from the moment she invited Kyle to come in, he was literally trying to speak through her computer. So it was like he was trying to speak directly to me. And we have all of that on tape, and you can actually hear Kyle's voice.
Wow, that has to be phenomenal for you, huh?
Yeah, and the thing is, Suzanne does hundreds and hundreds of readings. And this was the first time this has happened with her, where and I had to, like days later, I directed her to a spot on the tape where I could hear Kyle's voice. Because she does all hundreds of these. She doesn't go back and listen. She just sends me the tape. And I listen. I'm like, Suzanne, listen right here. And she she was shocked to hear his voice. You couldn't make out what he was saying, but you could clearly hear his voice. And it was like, so yes, it's what Helping Parents Heal is doing is so amazing, because it's letting these parents know, like Brandon wanted to let you know that. And when you described, before you said the word Unk, when you described it, I knew what you were talking about. I'm very familiar with the Unk cross. And matter of fact, now as soon as you said it, I said to myself, I gotta get me one. I have to get me an Unk cross. But I was thinking, yes, he's letting you know there is no death. There's just eternal life. And so my heart is so full with this is a beautiful story that you're sharing. Please continue.
Well, and Suzanne Giesman is the real deal. In fact, I met her about probably 6 months ago.
Okay.
And it was actually close to, or maybe it was less than that. I think it was close to the anniversary of Brandon's passing.
Okay.
Or his birthday, one of the two.
Okay.
But anyhow, I live in Portland, Oregon these days, and she was coming up here, and we'd made arrangements to meet for dinner. So we met and said hi, and I showed her a portrait of Brandon that was on my iPhone at the time. And Brandon, it was just him, framed like this. And she said, well, Brandon's showing me this, which is the hang loose sign from Hawaii. I said, well, we were in Hawaii at the time, so great. I didn't think that much about it because he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt. So I thought, okay.
Right.
But I thought, okay, that's good. And then the next morning I got up and I thought, wait a minute, that portrait I actually cropped from a group photo.
Right.
And let me check on that. So I dug up the group photo, and there's 5 of us, the 4 of us, Susie and I, Stephen and Brandon, plus a friend named Malcolm Rosal who lives in Hawaii.
Okay.
And we are all doing this.
Wow.
So it was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, yes. It's so true, like what you said, that it is like it's so great that I got to meet Suzanne actually about 6 months ago. She was here in the Wilkes-Barre, PA area, so I got to meet her in person. But it's so great when you know of these evidential mediums that bring forth hardcore evidence that they are in touch with your loved one, and your loved one is fine. So that, and they want us to know that they're fine, that there's eternal life, that they're still with us. And I think these messages are so important especially for parents, because I think as a parent, that's the toughest thing. You know, we all feel like, okay, you know, you're a parent, you're gonna end up having to bury one day your parents. But as a parent, you never dream of having to bury your child. So that is, it's so important to know the truth, like you said. And I think it's so amazing that you got to grow up in the environment you got to grow up in, knowing through your dad that there was, even though you didn't gravitate in that direction right away, it was still kind of implanted in you from a very young age. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because now I do speaking events and things from time to time, and there was a church, a spiritualist church in San Francisco that's had me go there and speak, and I've usually brought along a medium friend, Tina Powers, who lives in Tucson. She's phenomenal. Mm-hmm. But I think it was 2015, we were going there, and this is one of those spontaneous kind of psychic or mediumship things. It's interesting. But she had been bugging me from the beginning, like, Mark, if you get a message, would you share it during your talk? And I said, well, sure. But she kept bringing this up again and again. I think you're going to get a message. Are you going to share it? Yes, I will, you know.
Right.
So even to the day where we got there, it was a Sunday. And she goes, now, are you going to share the message if you get it? I said, yes, leave me alone. So we go into the church, and they're playing piano music, and it's kind of, you know, before the service. So I go back in their healing room, and people are getting hands-on healings, and I just sit there and I'm kind of quietly meditating. And as I'd mentioned before, I'm not a great meditator. I have a hard time quieting my mind, but this time I was able to get it like totally clear. And I sat there, and I got two pieces of information. First was the name Max, and then I got the name Maxine. So in my rational mind, I thought, okay, it must be one or the other. So maybe Max is wrong and it's Maxine, not Max.
Right.
But the way I got it to describe for people, because I always wondered when somebody says, oh, I've got this name. Well, how do you get the name? Do you hear it auditorially? And for me, no. Did I see it as a word? No. It just was there. It just kind of came in like an idea. Like if you think about, you have an idea,
right.
It came in like an idea would, or like just something that popped in, like a memory kind of thing.
Okay.
So I went up and I gave my talk. And at the end, I said, well, Tina's compelled me to share anything I might get. And before I started here, I got two things. I don't know if they'll mean anything to anybody here, but the names are Max and Maxine. And then the pastor of the church said, well, that's rather interesting, because the founder of the church, Florence Becker, who they all think of very highly, I mean, the whole church is really her creation. She was there from 1929 to 1970. Mm-hmm. Since Florence Becker had two children, they were named Max and Maxine. Wow. They were born stillborn, and they grew up in spirit. And he said, no one knows that except for just a couple of church members. It's kind of a secret here. And then afterward, he took me upstairs and showed me a painting that had been made. And it had a long winding road. And it was like a landscape picture. And at the very end were these two little figures. And he says, that's Max and Maxine.
Wow.
So that told me, wow, I can do this stuff, I guess, periodically. Yes. But,
yes.
You know, I think it was important in that case because it was healing to the people there, and probably to give me some encouragement too, even though I don't really focus on doing that kind of work myself, at least today.
Right.
I know that capability is there. I can kind of trust things when they come to me to share them.
Yes.
which is hard to do, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like I said, Suzanne was here in my area doing her serving spirit workshop, which I took. And like you said, I am not looking to quote unquote become a medium, but I do know that we all have that ability if we, like you said, quiet our minds and really tap in. And I know that Kyle said in my first reading with Suzanne, Kyle said he's very proud of what I'm doing with the show, and he's my co-host. So every time I'm doing a show, he's right here. So and he says that he sometimes will put messages, like you just said, like how Max and Maxine kind of just came in as an idea, and that's what he'll do as my co-host. He'll just give me an idea that I'll just speak, and I'll just think, okay, I got that idea, but it probably came from Kyle. So even I know where he's buried, that came from him. I was in the funeral parlor in the funeral home, speaking to the funeral director, who I knew, who was a friend of mine, and we were trying to find a plot, and he was saying here in Mount Pocono area where I live, he said there's no plots available, so we would have to go to Stroudsburg, which is south of here, which I'm thinking, my first thoughts is I really don't want to have Kyle buried in Stroudsburg. And what came to me just after he said that, I said, well, what about Newfoundland? Now, Newfoundland is about 10, 12 minutes north of here. And I go that way to the lake. I'm a jet skier. I love the jet ski, and I have my own jet ski. And the Lake Wallenpaupack, I have to go through Newfoundland to get to Lake Wallenpaupack. So he's like, yeah, well, actually it was Sterling, which is just closer to me than Newfoundland. There's this beautiful private cemetery, which he would have, the funeral parlor owner would never have thought about that. But I know that came from Kyle. So it's just like, I think where I have him, you know, his, I don't like to call it headstone. I like to call it monument. And I know he's not there. I know his physical remains are there, but he's not there. I know he's with me wherever I am, whenever I think of him. But I know that that came from him, you know, inspiring me to say, what about Newfoundland? You know, so
awesome.
Yeah.
It's funny how that happens. And
yes,
sometimes you wonder, is this my idea, or did that come in as inspiration, you know? And that's
right.
I think that's a hard part for people too. And that's probably one reason why even the best psychic mediums aren't always right, because they're still battling, like, well, you know, they're sharing everything that you're supposed to do, but they don't know necessarily, like, something could be a mix of your rational mind and other inspiration coming in. But when you look at the overall results, when you get some really phenomenal hits like the hang loose thing and things like that, you know, this person's dialed in. Yes. So, but I guess back to the original, the story that is in Soul Shift, you know, so I've gone through this series of readings. Go ahead.
Before you get there, I want to kind of go did the book come before Helping Parents Heal? Which came first?
The book.
Okay. So, all right. So you said that you were having a lot of readings with different mediums, and you kind of felt that it was going to be a book one day.
Yeah, it got to a point where I felt like I had enough content. And really, I think what I had started to do was I was going to do a biography on my father, because I wanted to channel my energy into something positive and to help his legacy continue on. And so I'd hired an editor out of New York City to work with me. And it wasn't long after I started on this, she goes, you know, and she saw some of the content I had that was kind of leading into this, that was talking about the catalyst, you know, that brought me to get back to writing about my father and about the spirituality stuff. And she said, I think you can write about your dad anytime. I think you have your own story to tell. And that's kind of where the idea for this book started, was that it would be something different than that, and more about validation and healing and, my own spiritual progression and journey and learning along the lines that I could share with other people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so the book, obviously I started writing the day after my son passed. I didn't even think of that as writing the book. Those were I was just pouring out feelings and information. And then as things happened, like the thing with my uncle and those things, I chronicled those. So I had everything written down, which was very good because we tend to forget stuff if we don't write it down sometimes.
Yes.
And then the book just kind of came to be. And then I started having these readings, which were, I would describe them as under fairly controlled conditions.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was with a medium out of England named Linda Williamson, and it was very good. And she provided a lot of good, pertinent information and direction. And in fact, looking back, she said, if I'm not mistaken, she said, I see you speaking in front of hundreds of people. I see you on TV. I see this thing becoming very big, and there's a lot of people on the other side behind you. So this is way before I'd even had any dream of any of this, of helping parents heal or any of these conferences I've spoken at, with this becoming so big.
Wow.
And she'd mentioned not only my father, but some scientists on the other side whose names I'm familiar with who were involved in researching psychic phenomena and mediumship and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
So she was the first. And then shortly thereafter, I'm trying to think chronologically, I think Allison Dubois may have been next.
Okay.
But the interesting thing about the Allison Dubois reading was 2 weeks before that, someone who had been acquainted with my dad gave me a manuscript, and it's called Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development by Dr. Richard Ireland, dated 1973. And it was all typed, it had a bibliography and everything. It was just a complete book ready to go, but it had never been published.
Wow.
And so I said to the person, why are you giving this to me now, 12 years after my dad died? And he said, I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to. And I didn't even know he had been holding this. So I think at the time I was living in Denver and my dad was in Phoenix. So perhaps that's why, because it wasn't easy for my dad to give me that. But here it is. This guy gives me this book. 2 weeks later, I had my reading with Allison Dubois. And one of the first things she said was, well, your dad's here and he's showing me a book. And I think it's his book, but he's handing it to you. So it's for you to take forward. Does that make sense? I'm like, well, yeah, it makes total sense. And I actually did get that book published in 2011. So
awesome.
That's out there too. Some of the other things she gave were, she said that your son is congratulating you on your 25th anniversary, which indeed had just happened about 6 weeks prior to the reading.
Right.
She had mentioned a cause of death that was similar to drowning. Well, Brandon obviously didn't drown, but the autopsy physician told me that the severe asthma attack that Brandon had, the symptom on the lungs, they worked to get extra oxygen and they expand to the point of almost meeting in the middle. And that happens in cases of drowning and severe asthma attacks. So it was the same type of effect on the body.
Yes.
She mentioned the names Susie and Nancy. Susie's my wife and Nancy's my sister-in-law. And there were a number of other things, but then met with a Jamie Clark in Phoenix. He's since become a friend. I'm friends with all these mediums, some of the researchers. So it's funny how this all happens. But Jamie had mentioned a photo of my son Brandon with his brother, arm in arm, in a very green area on a mountain pass that looks like Hawaii. Okay. And it didn't immediately ring a bell, but we went into a drawer where we had just hundreds of photos just piled from the past. Right. And sorted through it, and I found that photo that fit the description, which was really awesome.
Yeah.
He had then talked to Susie and said, I see, he's showing me that he's with you, and you were in the grocery store just the other day, and I see you going through your purse looking for something. You can't find it, but and Susie had gone in there. Well, she had loaned her credit card or debit card to our son Steven, and so she didn't have it when she was going to pay for the groceries. She was digging through her purse trying to find that.
Yes.
So that was good. And then I think the highlight for me, I mean, those other readings were great, but we're getting into the lab at the University of Arizona for the reading with Lori Campbell was really phenomenal, and having that tape for Discovery Channel as documentation of the event. Even though they edit it down, I've got a full documentation of the content of that reading in my book Soul Shift.
Wow.
But I think the thing that touched me most were, she had said that she was asked, and again, in this experiment, she couldn't see me. I was sitting behind her and I wasn't allowed to speak.
Right.
Only she could talk. So she was asked questions by the professor, and he had asked, what can the deceased person, and he did say Brandon, the deceased person, Brandon, say to the person behind you to let you know that it's him? And she said, well, I feel like there's a book being written about the person that passed by the person. And she had correctly identified that it was my son without being told. A number of other things she said, that she felt like he had vomited before passing, and his friend Stu had verified that was true. He had vomited shortly before he passed out. And also that there was a memorial with a plaque, and absolutely his high school, one of the kids had designed a sculpture of a bass guitar, and then there was a plaque at the bottom honoring our son, and I believe that is still there at Saguaro High School in Scottsdale, Arizona today. So there were a number of those things. So that, that was kind of, the journalistic part of my journey. Yeah. And then in the last couple chapters, I kind of digest the information and tell you what I think and what it all means. And really, I guess ultimately is that, life has purpose. It's not meaningless as a lot of folks are taught, based on the way a lot of people want to look at the world and the universe as chaotic and having no meaning or purpose. I think that's a lie. Yeah. We have a purpose. We have a path. So it's important to continue on even when you go through struggles. Right. And sometimes those struggles make us better people, make us more empathetic to others, and take us to the next level. And there's no easy way to get there. And when you go through that kind of a thing, it can really make you more valuable and more humble and more empathetic to other people. And that, life does go on. So don't despair. Grief is going to happen because we're spirits or souls in a physical body for a while. And we get used to having other physical beings around us that we love. But just because the shell is gone doesn't mean they're gone. And we have to remember that and trust that, we'll be back with them in the future. And in the meantime, we can still have a relationship of a different sort, like you have today with your son and like I've had with Brandon.
Yes.
And ultimately, those are kind of the messages that I share in the book. And those are my personal perspectives. I allow the reader to draw their own conclusions.
Yes. Yes. Like I say with my show, I just share what resonates as true for me. But I encourage everybody to go within and find what resonates with what resonates as true within them. So it's just sharing our personal journey, like you shared your personal story, which is so touching, and other parents and other people, not just parents, but people that have people on loved ones on the other side that you're still grieving, to know that they're still with you. They're not gone. I just think that's such an important message. And if it resonates with someone, it can definitely help, bring them out of their grief. So,
right.
So,
and I do encourage people, at a certain point in time, if they're open to it, they can have a mediumship reading like you had with Suzanne Giesman to help them. But I caution people too, because there are folks out there that feel they have the ability, and they're either, there are some frauds that just want to take people's money.
That's
and
true.
There are also people who think they're better than they are, or they may be a little deluded about the level of their ability. And that's something that can be dangerous too, because if you take somebody who's very vulnerable and they have a session with someone like that, it can set them back. Yes. So as healing as a good reading can be, a bad one can set people back. So
I'm very damaging. Yes.
Yeah, cautious about that. And for that reason, people come to me for recommendations, and I do have a list of people that I like and trust, but I've also developed a mediumship certification program of my own. And the reason I did it was because some of the top mediums that are excellent are booked out 6 months, a year, or whatever, and people can't wait that long. And some of them charge a lot because that's their sole source of income, which I understand, and I'm not denying them that right.
Right.
I mean, it's great if people want to charge less or whatever, but I just figured there are a lot of people out there that are lesser known that have good abilities. And sure enough, I found that to be the case. So I put together this program out of my own pocket, launched a website, spent a few $1,000s doing this, and have tested and had 12 different mediums pass the certification process. And to do this, they have to do 5 readings for someone they don't know, and they have no background information on them, and they're telephone readings. And then at the end, you know, the readings are recorded, transcribed, and then graded by the sitter for accuracy and also for outstanding validations. And as a result, like I said, 12 people have passed. And so I do have resources that I can relay to people now and have some confidence in. Even with that, you know, the best mediums aren't right all the time. And I would say even in the testing process, the ones that did the best, that graded, you know, the highest, even they had, you know, at least out of the 5, they had one reading that was either mediocre or not good. Right. And I think, you know, there are different reasons for that. It can come down to connection, I think, more than anything else, or how the medium feels physically that day, or if the sitter, you know, is somehow negative in a way, which is kind of natural. I understand someone's in deep grief.
Yes. Yeah. It's everything is vibration. But I'm so glad you're sharing that, because I recently got an email from a listener. I've done several shows with Suzanne Giesman, and I recently got an email from a listener saying, I really want a reading, but I know Suzanne's waiting list is maybe 2 years, at least 18 months long. And so she's in high demand. And so the listener was saying, I can't really afford Suzanne, and she has a very long waiting list. Can I recommend? And I at that time I said I only really know of the mediums that I've had on my show, but now I can direct that viewer to your website, which is amazing.
Yeah, so if they go to my website, there's a link there for that specific thing. And my website's markirelandauthor.com.
Thank you. And I was going to ask you to please share that. No, I was going to ask you to please share your link, how people can find out this information. Yeah. Sure.
Do you want me to talk about the formation of Helping Parents Heal?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
So going back to, I think it was 2010, but by that point, I was friends with Jamie Clark, one of the mediums I'd mentioned earlier. And we were actually doing some different types of presentations and workshops together, which were a lot of fun. And this particular one we did, there was an attendee named Suzanne Wilson that came there. And she's today now a very prominent medium, and she's very gifted. But at the time, she had just moved to Arizona from Florida. And I didn't know who she was, and I don't think many people did. So she came up to me during a break and had shared a validation with me that was pertinent and meaningful. And so we stayed in touch a little bit. I can't remember when this happened, but within a very short period of time of that meeting, she said, there's another bereaved parent I want you to meet. Her name's Elizabeth Boyson. Her son had passed in the Himalayas. And she didn't give me a lot of other details, but she just said, I want you to meet this woman. So my wife and I had made arrangements to meet Elizabeth, and it was like at a happy hour or something like that. So I met her. I gave her a copy of Soul Shift. So Soul Shift, I started writing, as I said, in 2004. It was published in 2008. I tried to get it published earlier, but hey, I was a first-time author. I didn't have the background, but I did get it published by a traditional publisher, which was really my goal, mainly for the distribution and the promotional aspects.
Right.
So 2008, it was published. So 2 years later, I have a book. I give it to Elizabeth. She reads it really quickly, loved it, was blown away. And then she reached back out to me and she said, hey, I've got this group of people I've pulled together in Carefree or Cave Creek, which is north of Scottsdale. Okay. I'd like you to, and we're going to have our first meeting. I'd like you to talk. Now, she'd been to other parents groups. I won't name names of the organizations, but she found like those didn't work for her so much because they really didn't allow the discussion of the spiritual stuff, or, you know,
Yes.
afterlife evidence, the stuff that people want more than anything else, you know.
Excuse me,
And
I'm just need a little
yeah, no,
sip. No,
no
my
problem.
throat is dry. But go ahead, go ahead. Mhm.
So I said, sure, I'll come speak, and I'll talk and share. So I went to this, and it was the first ever meeting of a group she had called Parents United and Lost. So she had this group, and then she had put a Facebook page up for it, I guess, to bring interest and to use it for notifying people about meetings. And at this first meeting, I could immediately tell we had a very diverse group of people, including, you know, people that are on one end of the spectrum, being maybe atheist or agnostic, to the other, fundamentalist Christian, and everything in between. And so she said, I just want you to talk about your book and all this. And I said, you know, I think, are you sure you want me to? Because I think there's some fundamentalists here, and we might get into some conflict. And so she said, no, go ahead, it'll be fine. So we did have some intense discussion, but fortunately I know enough about scripture and had my facts together that I could make references to things supporting the validity of this. You know, there's a number of them. You know, for example, for clairvoyance, Jesus speaking to the Samaritan woman at the well and telling her, you know, the fact that she had 5 husbands and the one man who's with her now is not her husband.
Right.
To him talking to dead people in plain sight of the disciples, that they call that the story of the transfiguration.
Yes.
So some of those kinds of things. So anyhow, at the end of the day, the meeting had a lot of really good dialogue and discussion, and people stuck. So there was a core group of people that came back again and again, and she asked me to, you know, participate and come and speak periodically. And then she would change the format sometimes to have guest speakers, or to have, I can't remember back then if she had mediums or not, but eventually she invited good mediums like Suzanne Wilson to come and do readings, gallery readings for the attendees, which was very healing. So go forward to late fall 2011, and I was leaving a corporate job that had been very stressful, and working for somebody that I didn't care for very much, who I felt was not the best person in the world.
Right.
But I talked to Tina Powers, and she said, Mark, I really feel like your main path or your purpose is to help these bereaved parents. So maybe think about how you can do that. And so I mulled it over, and I thought, well, you know, Elizabeth's doing great work, but it's only one location. You know, it's just there. And people have this need everywhere. And I thought, oh, what if, you know, and initially I thought, I'm going to have this national or international organization. So it was kind of the vision, the bigger vision. And then I thought, well, why do I need to reinvent the wheel? So I approached her and I said, hey, Elizabeth, you've already got the blueprint. You're doing this, but you don't have a website and you don't have a newsletter. What if we put our forces together and we took this thing out and we see if other people want to establish affiliate organizations in different cities in other locations and blow this out? And she says, oh, I'm all over it. And I said, well, I kind of had an idea for the name Helping Parents Heal. She goes, oh, I love that. You know, I didn't really like that name, Parents United and Lost. So with that,
I love, because words are important. And like for me, everything, I came to my awakening through science, through quantum physics, through the fact that everything is energy and that energy is interconnected. And I know that words have vibration. So the word loss has a lower vibration than helping parents heal. It's a much higher vibration, and it's all with words. Yes.
Yeah. So the rest is kind of history. You know, the Facebook page now has 10,000 members, and that's on a private page. I mean, it's hard for people to even get there. Yeah. And we have, I believe, 45 to 50 affiliates across the U.S. and overseas.
Now one in PA.
One in PA. And the newsletter has thousands of recipients. It's growing at hundreds per month. And then our first ever conference. This is something we talked about years ago. Like, hey, should we start trying to raise money? Because for the first several years, we never tried to raise a dime. We just did this at our own expense. And wanted people to be healed and helped. And so we decided to try and put a conference together. We were hopeful of, you know, getting 200 people there. We have over 400 people registered, and it would be higher, but we ran out of space. So
this is great. Yes.
And it's not going to stop, you know, it's going to continue growing.
Oh yeah. And it's so needed. It's so, like I said, I feel like I feel so in alignment with helping parents heal. I mean, for me, my mission, which I started, I launched, I got the idea to launch this show 6 months after Kyle's transition. And also the Kyle Foundation, which Kyle stands for Keep Your Light Expanding. And again, the same thing, like I did everything. I'm good with computers, so I created my own website. I host my own show. I did everything. It was just a one-woman show, and it was all about just sharing the truth of oneness, which to me is what just woke. When I woke to the truth of oneness and understood that we are literally all one, and when mankind awakens, because it's just about awakening and remembering who we are, remembering we are souls, eternal souls, having a temporary life experience, but we go in and out of different, it's not a permanent thing like death. There is no death, so my soul was encouraging me to share this message. And then I found out about helping parents heal. I actually originally found out about helping parents heal from my third guest. Like I said, this is my 106th show. And I launched 3 years ago. My third guest was Anne, I'm bad with names, Anne Pierre, author of Stephen Lives, which that book was actually channeled. She channeled it from her son, who committed suicide in the 70s at 15 years old, Stephen. And so Stephen wanted her to know he still lives. And she wrote that book, and she was my third guest. And so that's where I first heard of helping parents heal. But it's just so much in alignment with my mission of just awakening the world to the truth of who they are, that we're all one, and that life goes on, and our loved ones are not gone. So I just feel so honored that I can be a part of helping parents heal, and I'm definitely going to see you next week. And
yeah, looking forward to it. And you're doing great work. Thank you.
Thank you. I've never been to Arizona, so it seems like there's a lot of good stuff happening in Arizona. So I can't wait. I'm so excited. Yes.
Yeah, you're coming at a good time of year. It'll be a little warm, but it'll be nice.
Well, I'm still looking at some snow on the ground. We got about 8 feet of snow in the month of March. So.
Wow. I haven't had to deal with that in Portland, but I have to deal with gray skies and rain in the winter, which is not, I kind of miss Arizona this time of year, but we followed our son up here. He got married, and, we wanted to be near them, and it looks like there's a good chance of us being grandparents before long, so we wanted to make sure to be close to them.
Yes, that's wonderful. Yes. Well, yeah, I am a grandmom. I'm a Mima. I have one grandson. He's 8 years old. He just turned 8. So it is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And Kyle was my youngest, and he did get to see my grandson. He spent the first 3 years of his nephew. So I know he's very proud of his nephew, my grandson. So it's a wonderful, knowing that they're not gone, that he's still, and I'm really glad that he did get to spend a lot of time with my grandson before Kyle before he made his transition. So yeah, I'm so excited. I am so excited. And I think helping parents heal is so needed. And I really do hope we do. I mean, for the East, I think affiliates are more located in the West Coast and Arizona area, but as we spread out the East, we could use more affiliates on the East Coast as well.
Right. I know we have a few in the East. We have a lot in Florida for some reason, but outside of that, I think it's a little bit sparse on the Eastern Seaboard, and there's that's obviously the most populated area of the country. So
yes,
come on Philly, come on DC. Well, we have 2 in DC. I'm sorry.
Okay.
We have 2 in DC. We don't have Philly. Baltimore, I don't believe we have. New York City, we do have 1. We could use maybe more in the New York Metroplex area.
Yes.
And Boston, we don't have anybody. I think we have someone in New Hampshire, which isn't too far from Boston. So I'm kind of speaking off the top of my head here, but
right.
Yeah, if people hear this and they're interested, we'd love to have more affiliates.
Yes. So true. So true. So now Soul Shift, which I love the title of your book, Soul Shift, because I'm very much into our consciousness shifting, to raising our consciousness to who we truly are as a human species. And now soul shifting, I like that because our soul is just shifting from this life to the next. I like the word transition, but it's soul shift. It's the same thing. And but you have another book. You have a new book. Please share that.
Yeah, now this is a few years newer. It's called Messages from the Afterlife. Mm-hmm. And what I did was, it wasn't so much an extension of Soul Shift, although in a way it was, but this one was a little more focused on the science. It was focused on addressing science and skeptics, and also has a full chapter on religious implications in the history of religion, psychic phenomena, and mediumship. I felt that was important to address because there are a lot of folks that get hung up. They have fear because they're taught through their churches sometimes, like, hey, stay away from this stuff. Yeah. But they don't know why, or they don't know the deeper parts. And those, I argue that a lot of those are just traditional views that don't really reflect what's in Scripture. I mean, there are some cautions there, which I think are valid. But at the same time, there's a lot of instances where divination and prophecy and mediumship are shown in a positive light. And so I discuss those issues. And then there's also a chapter in the book on an experiment I conducted with my sister when she passed in 2006. Okay. So before she died, I asked her if she'd like to do this, that it could potentially help people. And I explained to her that the idea was for her to write a message that was short, put it into a sealed envelope, and then it would be retained until she passed. And then her job would be from the other side to try and convey that information or that message to a medium. Wow. And so I don't want to give away the punchline, but that's in there. It was a really interesting process that we went through with that. And I had the help of a couple of scientists. In fact, a neuroscientist that was a professor at the University of Kansas helped me with that. Wow. And so those pieces are in there. And then there's a whole chapter on skeptics and skepticism, and the difference between objective, true skepticism, open-minded skepticism versus, someone who already has this physicalistic, materialistic worldview, and everything's got to fit into that, and they're not open to the possibility that, that's not really the true nature of reality at all. Right.
I love this. I just want to jump in here because I love what you're saying, because for me, I took science. Science is what inspired my awakening. It's actually a film called What the Bleep, which was about,
I saw that.
Yeah, all about that was what inspired my awakening. And also, I am still friends, and for me anyway, with a lot of quote unquote fundamental Christians. And one of my very dear friends stopped speaking to me when I started this show 3 years ago. Now, I still consider this person a dear friend, but because one of my second or third guests was a channel, which I've had several channels, several mediums on my show as guests. But as soon as I said the word channel, it's like, I'm done with you. I'm like, what? Because of what you say, these and I know in my heart that everything I believe and resonate as true for me is in Scripture. Yeah, but to be so, like you said, narrow-minded, closed-minded, and not open to the possibilities and so I love. So now, what is the title of this new book?
So the second book, and it's not brand new, it's been out a couple of years, but it's Messages from the Afterlife.
Messages,
a bereaved father's journey in. Let me grab it. Hold on.
Okay. Okay. Great. Go get it.
Sorry,
No problem.
It's got a long subtitle. So This is the new book, or the newer book. I don't know if you can read that.
I can see it. Yeah, great. Awesome. Yeah.
So this book is going to be more for the science-minded reader who wants that deeper dive and to have the scientific data. but it's an interweaving of my personal experiences and my personal research along with the greater body of evidence that's been culled over time.
Yes.
The first book is Soul Shift.
Yes.
And my son, Stephen, actually did that illustration.
Wow.
And he didn't do it for the book specifically. He had just did it. And then I saw what he had done. I thought this would be perfect for my book cover.
Yes.
Because it kind of, you can kind of feel like, oh, I've got two realms and then the veil between.
Yes.
And I thought it was symbolically perfect for that.
That's perfect. Yes. Yes.
And and I told you I'd tell you how the title came to be, which is rather interesting.
Yes.
Because I have a publisher who wanted the title, get this, Ghost Souls, Finding the Dead. And I thought, I'm not doing that. That's nothing about what this book's about. It sounds macabre.
Yes.
And so I went to bed one night and I meditated on this and I said, I need another title. Yes. So I popped up one morning at 4 a.m. and I'm not an early riser, but it popped up and I got Soul Shift. And
yes.
so I went back and I said, it's got to be Soul Shift. And it's really a dual meaning, the shift of the transition of my son, but also the shift in me that took place. Yes. And then he's like, well, and I didn't really want the word dead, but he insisted on it. So he's like, well, instead of finding the dead, how about finding where the dead go? I said, okay, we can compromise on that.
Okay.
So it's Soul Shift, Finding Where the Dead Go.
Okay.
But that spurred questions when I was interviewed, like, well, where do the dead go? So then it's like, well, I didn't even want that in the title. So, and I would typically answer, I don't, and it's hard for me to say the where. It's it's just another dimensional reality.
Because they're right here. They're not going anywhere. They're right here.
Yeah,
it's just another dimension. So true. And I agree with you. I kind of would have fought the publisher a little bit more on the word dead, because I don't use that word dead at all. And one of the other things is I don't use the word bereavement. I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure it was Elizabeth when I first spoke to her, and I said, "No, I've never described myself as a bereaved parent." To be honest, I am working on my first book, and I will be sharing my story. And many of my regular listeners know, but my son, I went through 2 episodes with my son where doctors told me he wasn't going to live 3 years or 2.5 years before he actually transitioned. And during that time, I tried to take my life because I was not. I wrote a suicide note. It was in the hospital. He had been on life support for 5 weeks. Doctors came to me, took me in a different room because they know not to say certain things around the patient. So they took me. I was sleeping in his ICU room for 5 weeks, and they took me to the side to a different room to ask if they could take him off life support. So they said that he could not hear that, and because they had given up on him. I refused to let them take him off life support, but I knew, I didn't say this to them, I knew in my mind, my son is not leaving before I leave. So I not in his room. I went to a small waiting room a couple of floors up from the ICU. And the strongest thing I could get my hands on were over-the-counter sleeping pills. And I took a bottle of over-the-counter sleeping pills and wrote a suicide note. I'm not going to bury my son. My son's going to bury me. And so I was unconscious for 2 days. I remember briefly waking up in the ICU, ER actually first, and then being in the ICU. And when I came to consciousness, they allowed me to visit with my son, supervised. I was on 24-hour suicide watch. And they allowed me to visit with him like for a few minutes a day, supervised visits. They did not take him off life support because I never gave my permission for him to be taken off. And I remember the last time I did a supervised visit with him, I whispered in his ear. I said, "Kyle, get better so we could both go home." And this was December of 2011, so just before Christmas. And the hospital was in Philadelphia on 34th Street. So I experienced a true miracle on 34th Street that Christmas, because he took that night, after I whispered in his ear, Kyle, get better so we could both go home. He pulled himself off of life support. He pulled out the ventilator. He pulled out the feeding tube, and his vitals were like he was not even sick. The doctors, it was a true miracle. And 2 weeks after that, just before New Year's Eve, he and I went home. So from that miracle, from that miracle, I said to God, I said, I will never, ever, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I will never, ever, ever, ever stop thanking you for this miracle. So Kyle didn't get ill again until 2.5 years later. He was going in, as the ambulance was taking him to the hospital in April of 2014. I was thanking God. I said, thank you, God. I don't know if I'm going to bring him home this time. I don't know what's going to happen, but I will never stop thanking you. And so when Kyle transitioned, and he transitioned on July 1st, 2014, when he made his transition, I had been reading that in his ICU room. I was reading Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift by Robert Schwartz, who was my first guest on my show. And I knew that Kyle and I had a soul plan, that in the soul plan, he was going to leave before me, and it was a soul agreement. I knew it was a soul agreement. I knew it was a soul plan, and I knew he wasn't gone. His physical body was going to be gone, but he wasn't gone. So when he actually transitioned, I was completely at peace. I was comforting other people. Other people, like my cousin was breaking down, and I had to and she's like, wait a second, I should be comforting you. I was completely at peace when he transitioned, because I knew in my heart he wasn't gone. I knew this was our soul plan. I was supposed to stay here. I had work to do, and he was gonna. And so now we're partners. He and I are still partners. He's working on the other side of the veil. I'm working on this side of the veil. So,
nice.
Yeah. So,
it's nice you had that extra 2.5 years too.
Oh my goodness. Yes. I think it because the plan was for me to do this work. And I think if he had transitioned in 2011, I wouldn't be doing this work, or I may not even be here, So it's like, okay, wait a second, she's messing up the plan. Yeah. So
we have a detour.
Yeah. She needs so Kyle is probably had said, okay, she needs more time. Okay. So for her to do what she's supposed to do, she needs more time. So yeah, but it's all wonderful. Please share with our listeners again, Mark, how they can find you and the name of your books, and because I want everyone to be able to connect with you and follow your work.
Sure. And for those coming to the conference, you can hear me speak. I'll have 2 speaking opportunities during the conference. But my website is markirelandauthor.com. It's M-A-R-K, Ireland like the country, author. That's all just a string of letters, markirelandauthor.com. If you go there, there's a contact button if you want to write me. There's a media page with a lot of my interviews, TV appearances, the Discovery Channel piece. My books are on there, and I've got links to other pertinent sites. The books that I have, my books are Soul Shift, which is the memoir, and I think the people that enjoy reading a narrative that's a real personal journey will enjoy that the most. The more touchy-feely people will like that. Mm-hmm. There is science in it too, but it's more the personal journey. And then the follow-up is Messages from the Afterlife, and this is the book that delves into the science, talks about the skeptics, and it also touches on the religious issues for people who may be interested in that, and the justification of these kinds of things within the religious traditions.
Yes.
And also the experiment involving my sister. So science-minded will be more interested in this, and people who have questions about the spiritual religious connection with those things. There is a third book. It wasn't mine, but it's called Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development. And that was written by my father.
Yes.
But I was able to get that published in 2011, and that's available now too. I don't think I have one right in front of me. Actually, I do. Hold on. I'll show you that one too.
Great. Thank you.
So this is my dad's book, Your Psychic
Awesome.
Potential.
Yes, I think that's so wonderful that you were able to publish his book for him. So I think that's amazing. That is great. Yes.
Yeah, I was really honored.
Yes, that is amazing. And I can't wait. I'm so happy and so excited. I will be flying into Phoenix Thursday morning, the 12th. I'll be flying into Phoenix and I'll get to meet you in person.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Well,
Yes.
Safe travels, and thanks for having me on again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And you'll be, because I'm also doing another show. So I'll be doing my first show on location at the conference. So I'm going to be trying to get all of the speakers, 5 minutes with each of the speakers, and have a show on the conference. So that's great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, take care.
Thank
Thanks
you
again.
so much. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to see you next week. Okay.